There was something magical about Sundays in America's past. The church bells had barely stopped ringing, kids were running through the yard, and in the kitchen, Grandma was already hard at work, turning simple ingredients into a feast that could bring the whole family together. Sunday wasn't just the end of the week, it was the day when recipes weren't rushed, when the table was full, and when stories were passed down along with steaming plates of food. These dinners weren't fancy, but they carried a kind of love you could taste. A golden roast slowly cooking all afternoon. A pot of gravy bubbling on the stove. Warm biscuits piled high in a basket. For Grandma, it wasn't just about feeding the family, it was about creating tradition, comfort, and memories that still linger decades later. Today, many of these classic Sunday dinners have faded from our tables, but they remain a powerful symbol of family and nostalgia. In this video, we're going to revisit those unforgettable meals, the hearty, home-cooked recipes Grandma once made every week. So pull up a chair, grab a plate, and let's journey back to the kitchens that shaped America's Sunday nights. Pot roast with root vegetables. If there was one dish that defined Sunday dinners at Grandma's table, it was pot roast. Slow cooked for hours until tender, this hearty meal wasn't just food, it was a ritual. You could smell it the moment you walked through the door, the rich aroma of beef simmering with carrots, potatoes, and onions, filling every corner of the house with comfort. Pot roast was more than a recipe, it was a reminder that Sundays were for slowing down. Families would gather after church or a long week, knowing that Grandma's roast would be waiting. She didn't need expensive cuts of meat, just a tough roast, a heavy cast iron pot, and time. With patience, the meat became fork tender, soaking up the flavors of broth and vegetables until every bite melted in your mouth. What made it special wasn't just the taste, but the tradition. The big oval platter arriving at the center of the table, the steam rising as slices were carved, the hush that fell as everyone took that first bite. For many, this wasn't just dinner, it was a piece of home, a moment of togetherness, and a memory that lingered long after the plates were cleared. Pot roast wasn't flashy, but it was reliable. It was love served in the form of food, the kind of meal that told you, without words, that you belonged. Classic meatloaf with brown gravy. Few meals brought the same kind of comfort to Sunday dinners as Grandma's meatloaf. It was simple, humble, and yet it always felt like a feast. The moment she pulled it from the oven, the smell of seasoned beef, onions, and breadcrumbs filled the kitchen, a scent that could make even the toughest day feel better. Grandma didn't waste a thing. Leftover bread became crumbs, a splash of milk softened the mixture, and eggs bound it all together. Sometimes she added a pinch of herbs from the garden, other times just a bit of ketchup or mustard for flavor. But no matter how she made it, her meatloaf always came out hearty and perfect. And then there was the gravy. Thick, rich, and poured generously over each slice, it turned an ordinary dish into something unforgettable. Some families swore by a tomato glaze on top, while others insisted nothing beat brown onion gravy ladled right over the loaf. Either way, the first cut into that steaming pan revealed a meal that was both filling and familiar. What made meatloaf special wasn't its ingredients, it was the way it gathered people around the table. Kids loved it, parents relied on it, and Grandma knew it would stretch far enough to feed everyone. It wasn't just dinner. It was security, comfort, and the taste of home. Meatloaf with brown gravy may seem old-fashioned today, but for generations, it was the definition of a Sunday classic. Southern fried chicken and mashed potatoes. Crispy, golden, and perfectly seasoned, nothing could bring a family to the table faster than Grandma's fried chicken. On Sundays, the sound of sizzling oil was like music in the kitchen, each piece of chicken carefully turned until it reached that irresistible crunch. For many, fried chicken wasn't just a meal, it was a celebration. Grandma didn't need fancy marinades or secret spice packets. A simple dredge in seasoned flour, maybe dipped in buttermilk if she had it, was all it took. The magic came from her hands, the patience of frying in small batches, and the love poured into every step. When that platter hit the table, stacked high with drumsticks, wings, and thighs, it was a sight that could make mouths water instantly. And of course, no fried chicken dinner was complete without mashed potatoes. Creamy, buttery, whipped smooth or left a little chunky, they were the perfect partner to fried chicken. A ladle of gravy tied it all together, soaking into both potatoes and crispy crusts. It was comfort food in its purest form, simple ingredients transformed into something unforgettable. What made this meal so powerful wasn't just the taste, but the ritual. Families laughed and talked as they reached for their favorite piece, children argued over drumsticks, and everyone left the table full and happy. It was more than food, it was tradition, carried on from one generation to the next. Fried chicken and mashed potatoes might be found in restaurants today, but nothing ever compares to Grandma's version, made with patience, love, and a kitchen full of warmth. Chicken and dumplings. On chilly Sundays, when the air carried a bite of cold, Grandma often turned to one of her most comforting dishes, chicken and dumplings. This wasn't just dinner, it was a warm hug served in a bowl. A pot would bubble slowly on the stove, filled with tender chicken, rich broth, and soft vegetables. And just when the kitchen already smelled heavenly, Grandma would drop in the dumplings, pillowy mounds of dough that steamed until light and fluffy. Every spoonful told a story. The chicken, often just a whole bird simmered down to its bones, gave the broth a deep, hearty flavor. Carrots, celery, and onions added sweetness and color. And those dumplings, whether rolled thin like noodles or scooped in as doughy clouds, were the real stars. They soaked up the broth, turning each bite into comfort itself. Chicken and dumplings wasn't about elegance. It was about resourcefulness. Families stretched one chicken to feed a whole table, and flour for dumplings was always on hand. Yet somehow, the dish never felt like making do. Instead, it felt rich, filling, and deeply satisfying. Gathered around the table, bowls steaming, conversations flowing, it was the kind of meal that slowed time. Kids blew on their spoons, parents savored every bite, and Grandma smiled, knowing she had once again turned the simplest ingredients into pure magic. Today, chicken and dumplings remain a symbol of Southern tradition and American resilience, but for many, it will always taste like childhood Sundays at Grandma's house. Baked ham with pineapple glaze. Few Sunday dinners felt as festive as Grandma's baked ham, shining in the oven with its caramelized glaze and jeweled rings of pineapple. This dish wasn't just a meal, it was a centerpiece. The moment it came out of the oven, golden and fragrant, the whole family knew Sunday was about to be something special. Grandma would score the ham in neat diamond patterns, pressing whole cloves into each cross like tiny decorations. Then came the glaze, a sticky mixture of brown sugar, mustard, and pineapple juice, brushed over the meat again and again as it baked. Slices of pineapple, sometimes with bright red maraschino cherries in the center, were pinned to the ham, giving it that unmistakable mid-century charm. The result was unforgettable, savory ham infused with the sweetness of fruit and the warmth of spice. Each slice carried a balance of salty and sweet, juicy and caramelized. And with sides like scalloped potatoes or green beans, the table felt complete. What made baked ham so beloved wasn't just the flavor, but the occasion it created. It often appeared on holidays, but for some families, Grandma made it on Sundays when she wanted to remind everyone that family time was worth celebrating. It turned an ordinary weekend into a feast, filled with laughter, conversation, and the clinking of dishes passed around the table. Even today, the image of a glazed ham with pineapples and cherries sparks instant nostalgia. It wasn't just dinner, it was tradition, celebration, and the sweet taste of togetherness. Chicken pot pie. Few meals could comfort a family like Grandma's homemade chicken pot pie. Golden, flaky crust on the outside, warm and creamy filling on the inside, it was the kind of Sunday dinner that felt like a reward after a long week. Just one whiff of that buttery crust baking in the oven was enough to make mouths water and bring everyone straight to the table. The filling was always hearty, chunks of tender chicken, carrots, peas, potatoes, and onions all swimming in a rich, velvety gravy. Nothing fancy, just simple ingredients transformed into something extraordinary. Grandma would roll out the dough by hand, carefully sealing the pie so the bubbling sauce stayed tucked inside. And when it finally came out of the oven, golden and steaming, it was almost too beautiful to cut into. Almost. The first slice was always magic. The crust chattered softly under the knife, releasing a rush of savory steam. Each bite was a balance of flaky pastry and creamy, comforting filling. It was food that warmed not only the stomach but also the heart. Chicken pot pie wasn't just a dish, it was a tradition. It showed how Grandma could take leftover chicken and a few vegetables and turn them into a meal fit for a king. Around the table, laughter mingled with the sound of forks on plates, and no one left hungry. For many, chicken pot pie will always be more than just dinner. It was home baked into a crust, comfort you could taste, and love served by the slice. Spaghetti and meatballs, Sunday sauce. For countless families, nothing said Sunday dinner like a big pot of spaghetti and meatballs simmering on the stove. The rich smell of tomatoes, garlic, and herbs filled the whole house, drifting from the kitchen long before the meal was ready. It wasn't just food, it was an event, a ritual, a tradition passed down through generations. Grandma's Sunday sauce started early in the day. Tomatoes simmered low and slow, sometimes with a splash of wine, sometimes with a pinch of sugar to cut the acidity. Meatballs, rolled by hand with breadcrumbs, eggs, and herbs, were browned in a skillet before being dropped into the sauce to soak up all that flavor. The longer it cooked, the better it got, filling the house with anticipation. By dinner time, the table was set with a heaping bowl of spaghetti, topped with those tender meatballs and a ladle of steaming sauce. A sprinkle of parmesan finished it off, and maybe some garlic bread sat on the side. The first bite was always unforgettable, comforting, flavorful, and full of love. Spaghetti and meatballs wasn't just about taste, it was about connection. Families lingered at the table, telling stories, passing bread, laughing together. For Grandma, this meal wasn't just about feeding people, it was about bringing them close, about making sure Sunday felt special. Even today, the memory of Sunday sauce bubbling away on the stove brings back the warmth of those dinners. It wasn't just pasta, it was family, tradition, and a reminder that the best meals are the ones made with patience and love. Salisbury steak with onion gravy, There was something deeply comforting about Grandma's Salisbury steak. It wasn't fancy, but it had a way of making Sunday dinners feel hearty and complete. Picture tender, seasoned beef patties simmering in a skillet, slowly soaking in rich onion gravy. The smell alone could pull everyone to the table before she even called for dinner. Salisbury steak was born as a way to stretch ground beef, but in Grandma's kitchen, it became so much more. She'd mix breadcrumbs, eggs, and spices into the meat, shaping it into oval patties that resembled little steaks. Once browned, they were bathed in a savory gravy made with caramelized onions and beef broth, simmering until the flavors blended perfectly. Served alongside mashed potatoes or buttered noodles, it was the kind of meal that filled both stomachs and hearts. The magic of this dish wasn't just its taste but its practicality. Ground beef was affordable and reliable, making it the star of many mid-century dinners. But Grandma had a way of turning that simple staple into something special, a dish that felt like comfort on a plate. Gathered around the table, plates steaming, families shared more than food, they shared time, stories, and laughter. Salisbury steak was a meal that stretched beyond the plate, becoming part of Sunday traditions, a memory tied to home and love. Even now, the thought of Salisbury steak with onion gravy brings back images of warm kitchens, clinking silverware, and the kind of dinners that made Sundays feel whole. Beef stroganoff over egg noodles. On Sundays when Grandma wanted to serve something a little richer, she often turned to beef stroganoff. Creamy, hearty, and comforting, it was a dish that felt both special and familiar. Just the sight of tender beef strips nestled in a velvety sauce, poured over a bed of buttery egg noodles, was enough to make the whole family's mouths water. The magic of stroganoff came from its sauce. Grandma would sauté onions and mushrooms until golden, then stir in sour cream or cream of mushroom soup to create that smooth, tangy richness. Thin slices of beef were browned, then left to simmer gently until tender, soaking in every bit of flavor. When poured over a steaming pile of noodles, the result was a dish that felt luxurious, even if it was made with simple pantry staples. This meal carried a sense of comfort that went beyond taste. It was about warmth, about slowing down and savoring a hearty plate after a long week. The noodles stretched the dish to feed everyone, and the creamy sauce was so good that kids often licked their plates clean. What made beef stroganoff so memorable was how it bridged worlds, rooted in European tradition, yet adapted in American kitchens to suit everyday families. For Grandma, it wasn't about fancy origins. It was about creating a dinner that brought people together, that made Sunday nights feel whole. Even today, the memory of beef stroganoff over egg noodles carries the taste of love, family, and the kind of comfort food only Grandma could perfect. Shepherd's pie. Few dishes warm the heart on a Sunday evening quite like Grandma's shepherd's pie. Though its roots were in humble kitchens overseas, it became a staple in American homes, especially when families needed to stretch ingredients and still serve something hearty. It wasn't just dinner, it was comfort-led in a dish. Grandma would start with a skillet of ground beef, onions, and maybe some carrots or peas, seasoned just right. This savory base formed the first layer, rich and filling. Then came the topping, a thick blanket of mashed potatoes, whipped creamy and smooth, sometimes dotted with butter to create a golden crust as it baked. When it emerged from the oven, steaming hot with little brown peaks of potato, it was impossible to resist. Every bite was a balance, savory meat, tender vegetables, and buttery potatoes coming together in harmony. Kids loved it, adults appreciated its heartiness, and Grandma knew it could feed a whole table without costing much. It was resourcefulness disguised as comfort food, and it worked every time. What made shepherd's pie unforgettable was the way it brought families together. Served in generous scoops, it was more than a meal, it was tradition. Around the table, laughter and conversation flowed as plates were filled, and for a while, the world outside didn't matter. Shepherd's pie wasn't flashy or complicated, but it carried love in every layer. For many, the memory of digging into Grandma's version still brings back the warmth of those Sunday evenings, when food meant family and every bite tasted like home. Pork chops with applesauce. There was something timeless about the pairing of pork chops and applesauce, a dish Grandma often brought to the Sunday table. It was simple, yes, but it carried a balance of flavors that felt almost magical. The savory richness of the pork, browned to perfection in her skillet, was softened by the sweet tang of applesauce, creating a harmony that never failed to please. Grandma's pork chops were never rushed. She seasoned them with just enough salt and pepper, maybe a touch of sage, and let them sear until golden brown. The sizzle filled the kitchen with anticipation, while a pot of homemade applesauce simmered nearby. Made from fresh apples, sugar, and a hint of cinnamon, it wasn't just a side dish, it was the soul of the meal. The first bite was always unforgettable. Tender, juicy pork alongside the cool sweetness of applesauce was a combination that felt comforting and familiar, a taste of home-cooked love. Served with mashed potatoes or buttered green beans, it was the kind of dinner that made Sundays feel complete. This dish wasn't just about flavor, it was about tradition. Pork chops with applesauce had a way of reminding families of their roots, of simple meals that nourished both body and spirit. Around the table, plates were filled, stories were shared, and Grandma smiled knowing she had once again turned basic ingredients into something special. Even today, the memory of pork chops with applesauce brings back the warmth of those family Sundays, a reminder that sometimes the simplest meals are the ones we cherish most. Stuffed bell peppers. When Grandma wanted to make Sunday dinner both colorful and filling, she turned to stuffed bell peppers. Bright green, red, or yellow peppers stood tall like little edible bowls, each one packed with a savory mixture that brought comfort with every bite. Just the sight of them lined up in the casserole dish, bubbling in tomato sauce, felt like home. The filling was always hearty, ground beef or sometimes leftover roast, mixed with rice, onions, and just enough seasoning to bring it all together. Some versions had a touch of cheese on top, others stayed simple, letting the flavors of the meat and tomato sauce shine. The peppers softened as they baked, turning tender while still holding their shape, ready to be scooped onto plates with a spoonful of sauce dripping down the side. Stuffed peppers were more than just dinner, they were a clever way to stretch ingredients. A single pound of beef, combined with rice and vegetables, could feed a whole family. But Grandma had a way of making this frugal dish feel like a feast. Served with bread or a small salad, it turned Sunday into something special without breaking the budget. For many, the taste of stuffed peppers brings back memories of laughter around the table, of family gathered close, of Grandma carefully pulling the dish from the oven with pride. It wasn't about extravagance, it was about care, resourcefulness, and love baked into every pepper. Even today, stuffed bell peppers remain a nostalgic symbol of those Sunday evenings when the simplest meals carried the deepest meaning. Homemade lasagna. Few dishes could make Sunday dinner feel like an occasion the way Grandma's lasagna did. Layer after layer, it wasn't just food, it was tradition, patience, and love stacked high in a casserole dish. The moment it came out of the oven, golden and bubbling with melted cheese, the whole family knew it was time to gather. Grandma's lasagna started with her sauce. Sometimes it simmered all afternoon, filled with garlic, onions, and herbs, blending into a rich, savory base. Then came the noodles, carefully layered with ricotta or cottage cheese, seasoned meat, and plenty of mozzarella. Layer after layer, she built it slowly, making sure every bite would be hearty and satisfying. When the dish was finally baked, the first slice was always a moment of awe. The cheese stretched in long strings, the sauce spilled onto the plate, and the smell was enough to make mouths water instantly. Served with garlic bread and maybe a simple salad, lasagna turned an ordinary Sunday into a feast. But what made it special wasn't just the taste, it was the togetherness. Families lingered at the table longer on lasagna nights, savoring not only the food but also the laughter, stories, and love that filled the room. Homemade lasagna was never quick, never rushed. And that was the point. It was a reminder that the best meals take time, that tradition is worth preserving, and that Grandma's kitchen was always a place where food meant family. Even today, the memory of her lasagna brings back the warmth of those Sundays, when a simple casserole dish carried the weight of love and home. Roast turkey with sage stuffing. While most people think of turkey as a holiday meal, in Grandma's kitchen it often made its way to the Sunday table too, especially when she wanted the week to end with a true feast. The smell of a roast turkey filling the house was enough to make everyone gather early, waiting for that first juicy slice. Grandma's turkey wasn't complicated, but it was always perfect. She'd rub it with butter, season it generously with salt, pepper, and herbs, and slide it into the oven for hours. Slowly, the skin turned golden and crisp while the meat stayed tender and moist. But the real heart of the meal was the stuffing. Her sage stuffing was legendary, made with cubes of day-old bread, sautéed onions, celery, and just the right touch of poultry seasoning. Mixed together and baked until soft on the inside with a crisp edge on top, it carried the warmth of tradition in every bite. A ladle of gravy tied it all together, often poured not just on the turkey but on mashed potatoes and stuffing too. What made this dish unforgettable wasn't just the flavor, it was the ritual. The carving knife slicing through the turkey, the platter passed around the table, the laughter as everyone reached for their favorite parts. Sunday turkey dinners felt like mini holidays, moments when family came first and time seemed to pause. Even today, the thought of roast turkey with sage stuffing brings back the glow of Grandma's kitchen, where food wasn't just nourishment, but an act of love, a way of saying you belong here.